clip that split the NBA. The NBA did not explode because of a dunk, a buzzer beater, or a trash talk moment caught on a hot mic. It exploded because of one quiet, dangerous-looking sequence that fans could not stop replaying. Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren were fighting for rebounding position. The whistle had not protected anyone, and in the middle of all that playoff chaos, one clip appeared to show Chet stepping directly into Wembanyama's space, his foot landing near Victor's ankle as the Spurs superstar tried to react. In real time, it looked like just another rough possession, but once the internet slowed it down, zoomed in, and watched it frame by frame, the entire conversation changed. Suddenly, this was no longer just Spurs versus Thunder. This was Wemby versus Chet. This was future versus future. This was one 7-foot unicorn being accused by fans of crossing a line against the one player the league is already treating like the next face of basketball. And that is why the reaction was so intense. Because when you are talking about Victor Wembanyama, you are not talking about a normal star. You are talking about a player San Antonio built its future around. A player who changes shots without jumping. A player who can bring the ball up like a guard, shoot from the logo, protect the rim, and make even elite NBA athletes look small. So when fans saw Chet's foot near Wemby's ankle, they did not just see contact. They saw risk. They saw danger. They saw a moment that could have changed the entire Western Conference final. To be fair, nobody can honestly say what was inside Chet Holmgren's mind. Playoff basketball is physical. Rebounding battles are messy. Feet get tangled, arms get grabbed, bodies collide, and sometimes a slow motion replay can make a split-second movement look much worse than it felt live. But that did not stop NBA fans from choosing sides immediately. One side called it reckless. Another side said it was normal playoff contact. But everyone agreed on one thing. The footage felt bigger because of the history between these two. This was not just a random collision. This was the latest spark in a rivalry that started years before they became NBA stars. So now I want to know where you are watching from. Comment your city or country below. If you think that play was dangerous, type 1. If you think fans are overreacting and it was just playoff basketball, type 2. And if you want more NBA stories like this, make sure you subscribe, because this Wemby and Chet rivalry is only getting started. When slow motion turned contact into controversy. The moment that clip hit social media, the game itself almost became secondary. People were no longer talking only about the score, the rotations, or who had the better fourth quarter execution. They were watching one possession over and over again, asking the same uncomfortable question: was Chet Holmgren just battling for position, or did he take the physicality too far? That is the power of slow motion in the modern NBA. In real time, a play can disappear in half a second. The ball goes up, bodies crash, the rebound comes down, and the broadcast moves on. But online, nothing disappeared. Every foot placement gets frozen, every shoulder bump gets clipped, every glance becomes evidence, and when the player involved is Victor Wembanyama, the reaction becomes 10 times louder. Fans were furious because they understood what was at stake. Wembanyama is not just another star having a good playoff run. He is San Antonio's entire future. He is the centerpiece of a franchise that has waited for its next generational big man. So when people saw his leg trapped in traffic even for a second, they imagined the worst. One awkward landing, one wrong twist, one bad step, and the entire series could have changed. But that is where the debate became heated. Thunder fans pushed back immediately. They argued that playoff basketball has always been physical, especially in the paint. Big men fight for inches. They lean, hold, swim, push, box out, and try to take away space before the shot even hits the rim. From that perspective, Chet was not doing anything sinister. He was simply trying to survive against the most unique physical force in basketball. Spurs fans did not buy that explanation. To them, this was part of a larger pattern. They believed Oklahoma City had been crowding Wembanyama all series, making every catch uncomfortable, bumping him off his spots, and daring the officials to call everything. And when the referees let contact go, the Thunder only became more aggressive. That is why the clip exploded. It confirmed what many San Antonio fans already felt. Wemby was being tested, targeted, and forced to protect himself. Still, the most interesting part was not just the outrage. It was how quickly the conversation became personal. Fans were not simply arguing about a foul. They were arguing about Chet's reputation, Wemby's treatment, OKC's toughness, and whether this young rivalry had already crossed into something deeper. Because the truth is, random playoff contact does not go viral like this. This clip went viral because the names attached to it were too big. Wembanyama and Holmgren are not just two tall players fighting under the rim. They are two visions of the NBA's future. Two franchise pillars, two unicorns who have been compared since before they were old enough to legally buy a drink in the United States. And now, with a trip to the finals on the line, every little collision between them feels like a message. Wembanyama turned Game 1 into his warning shots. Before the controversy swallowed the internet, Victor Wembanyama had already made the loudest statement of the series with his game. Game 1 was supposed to be the matchup everyone had been waiting for. Wemby against Chet, Spurs against Thunder, two young giants standing in the middle of the Western Conference Finals, both carrying the future of their franchises on shoulders that somehow looked too narrow for all that pressure, yet strong enough to hold it anyway. But once the ball went up, the battle did not feel even. Wembanyama was not just playing well, he was controlling the entire atmosphere. Every time Oklahoma City thought it had forced him out of rhythm, he found another answer. If they crowded him, he passed over the defense. If they backed up, he rose into a jumper. If they sent bodies into the paint, he stretched the floor until their spacing broke apart. And when the game became tight, when every possession started to feel heavier than the last, Wemby looked almost calmer. That was the terrifying part. He finished with 41 points and 24 rebounds in a double overtime thriller, but the numbers alone do not explain what it felt like. It felt like the Spurs had a player who could bend the game in ways Oklahoma City could not fully prepare for. He protected the rim on one end, dragged defenders into impossible decisions on the other, and made the Thunder work for every inch of confidence they tried to build. Then came the shot that changed the energy of the night. With the Spurs staring at pressure and the clock shrinking, Wembanyama stepped into a deep three that looked too far for a center, too calm for the moment, and too cold for anyone who still thought he was just a young star learning how to win. The ball dropped, the game was tied, and suddenly the arena understood that Wemby was not waiting for his era to begin. He was already dragging everyone into it, and Chet Holmgren had to feel that. Not because he is not talented, not because he is not important to Oklahoma City, but because in that specific game, under that specific spotlight, the gap in presence felt obvious. Chet battled, Chet competed. Chet gave the Thunder size, defense, and structure, but Wembanyama gave the Spurs mythology. That is why the alleged footstep clip hit so hard afterward. If Wemby had played a normal game, maybe fans would have argued for a few hours and moved on. But he had just delivered one of those performances that makes people feel protective, almost territorial, over greatness. He had turned Game 1 into a personal showcase, and then the internet found a moment where that greatness looked vulnerable. That combination is explosive. A superstar performance, a dangerous looking replay, a rival standing right next to him, a fan base already convinced their young king is being pushed, grabbed, tested, and hunted. So when people watched the clip again, they were not only seeing Chet's foot, they were seeing the possibility that the only thing that could slow Wembanyama down might not be defense, but danger. And that made the entire rivalry feel darker. The timeout bump that said everything without words. Then came the moment that turned the rivalry from controversial to personal. It was not a shot, it was not a block, it was not a chest-to-chest argument with referees stepping between two players. It happened during a timeout when the whistle had already stopped the action and everyone on the floor should have been walking back to their benches, resetting their minds, and preparing for the next possession. But Victor Wembanyama did not just walk back. He moved past Chet Holmgren and gave him a cold, casual bump that instantly became one of the most replayed moments of the series. It was not dramatic in the traditional sense. There was no shouting, no wild gesture, no explosion. That is exactly why it felt so powerful. Wemby barely reacted. He did not turn around. He did not stare Chet down. He did not need to. The message was in the silence. For fans watching at home, that tiny shoulder brush felt like a window into what Wembanyama really thinks about Holmgren. It looked like a player saying, without saying a single word, "I know you are there, but I am not afraid of you." And in playoff basketball, sometimes that kind of calm disrespect cuts deeper than trash talk. The best part was Jalen Williams' reaction. Holmgren's own teammates saw it happen and immediately reacted like everyone else watching the replay later. He knew it was not just accidental traffic. He knew there was something behind it. His face said what the whole internet was about to say. These two do not just compete. They feel each other. That is what separates this rivalry from a normal star matchup. Plenty of great players battle in the playoffs. Plenty of big men fight for space, trade blocks, exchange bumps, and move on. But Wembanyama and Holmgren carry a different kind of tension because their names have been connected for years. Every time they stand near each other, the NBA world starts comparing body language, confidence, toughness, skill, and status. And Wemby's body language in that timeout moment was ice cold. It did not look like anger. Anger is loud. Anger loses control. This looked like memory. This looked like a player who had not forgotten the history, the comparisons, the debates, the old losses, the awards, the headlines, and every conversation that tried to place Chet Holmgren beside him as his equal. Maybe that is unfair to Chet. Maybe the internet reads too much into 2 seconds of footage. But perception matters in the NBA. And that clip instantly changed the feeling of the series. It made fans go back and reinterpret everything. The footstep controversy, the physical defense, the old FIBA matchup, the Rookie of the Year race, and the way both players seem to carry themselves whenever they share the floor. Suddenly, the series was no longer just about who would win 4 games first. It was about who would own the future first. Because when Wembanyama bumped Holmgren during that timeout and kept walking like nothing happened, it felt less like a random moment and more like a warning. Chet may have the Thunder behind him. He may have the home crowd, the defensive system, and the deeper roster. But Wemby has something just as dangerous. He has the belief that he is inevitable. The rivalry started long before the NBA cameras arrived. To understand why every Wembanyama and Holmgren moment feels heavier than a normal playoff clash, you have to go back before the Spurs, before the Thunder, before the Rookie of the Year race, and before the NBA turned them into the 2 most compared young big men in basketball. You have to go back to 2021. At the FIBA U19 World Cup final, Victor Wembanyama was still the French phenom everyone whispered about like a basketball myth that had not fully arrived yet. Chet Holmgren was the American unicorn, a skinny 7-footer with guard skills, shot-blocking instincts, and the kind of confidence that made scouts believe he could become the future of the modern big man. They were teenagers, but the basketball world was already watching them like future franchise saviors. That game became the first real chapter of their story. Team USA beat France. Chet walked away with the gold medal. He was named tournament MVP. And Wembanyama, despite showing flashes of something almost unreal, had to stand on the other side of that celebration and absorb the feeling of coming up short. That kind of loss stays with a competitor. Not because Chet destroyed him one-on-one every possession, not because the entire game was only about Holmgren versus Wembanyama, but because history often remembers symbols more than details. Chet got the medal, Chet got the MVP, Chet got the early bragging rights, and Wemby got the memory. That is the part people miss when they look at this rivalry only through NBA highlights. This is not just about 2 tall players who happen to play the same position. This is about 2 careers that have been running on parallel tracks since they were teenagers. Every time one rose, the other was mentioned. Every time one made a headline, the other became the comparison point. Every scout report, every debate, every draft conversation, every unicorn label pushed them closer together before they ever chose to be rival. For Wembanyama, that FIBA loss was not the end of anything. It became fuel. It became one of those quiet memories great athletes carry into empty gyms, long flights, lonely workouts, and pressure moments when nobody else understands why they look so locked in. For Holmgren, it was proof. Proof that he belonged in the same conversation as the most hyped international prospect of his generation. Proof that his frame, his skill set, and his defensive instincts could hold up against elite competition. Proof that he was not just a strange prospect with long arms and potential, but a winner on a global stage. That is why the NBA version of this matchup feels so charged. Wemby did not arrive with a blank history. Chet did not arrive as a random challenger. They arrived with receipts, memories, comparisons, and unfinished business. So when Wembanyama bumps Holmgren during a timeout, fans see more than a bump. When Chet battles him under the rim, fans see more than rebounding position. When one clip goes viral, the internet immediately attaches years of history to it, because those years are already there. And now, what began in a youth championship has grown into something much bigger. 2 7-foot stars, 2 small market contenders, 1 Western Conference war, and a rivalry that feels like it was waiting for the NBA stage to finally explode. The injury twist that made the rivalry personal, the strange thing about the Wembanyama and Holmgren rivalry, is that it almost should not have happened on the same timeline. Chet Holmgren entered the NBA first. Oklahoma City selected him with the 2nd overall pick in 2022, believing he could become the perfect big man for their young core. A rim protector, floor spacer, and defensive anchor beside Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But before Chet could truly begin, his rookie season vanished. A foot injury kept him out for the entire year, forcing him to watch from the sideline while the league kept moving. Then Victor Wembanyama arrived. San Antonio drafted Wemby number 1 overall in 2023, and the hype was instantly different. He was not treated like a normal rookie. He was treated like the future of basketball. Every block, every deep three, every impossible highlight became proof that the NBA had never seen a player quite like him. Because of Chet's injury, the 2 suddenly entered their official rookie seasons together. That twist turned everything into a direct comparison. Wemby versus Chet, Spurs versus Thunder, number 1 pick versus the delayed number 2 pick. Chet had the better team, Wemby had the bigger spotlight. Chet fit perfectly into OKC's system. Wemby looked like an entire franchise was being rebuilt around him. That is why the Rookie of the Year race became more than an award. It became a battle over status. Was Chet the winning piece on a rising contender, or was Wembanyama simply too special to ignore? When Wemby pulled ahead, the rivalry changed. Chet was no longer just the FIBA winner from 2021, he became the player trying to close the gap in the NBA story, and Wemby became the standard everyone else had to chase. So by the time they met in the playoffs, every bump, every block, and every viral clip already carried years of pressure behind it. The league put them on the same rookie timeline. Now the playoffs are deciding who owns the future first. The awards battle that changed the power bout. By the time Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren reached the playoffs, their rivalry was no longer just about highlights. It was about status. At first, Chet had the early edge in the story. He had beaten Wemby in the 2021 FIBA U19 final. He had the gold medal. He had the tournament MVP. He had the first major win in their shared history, but once both players entered the NBA spotlight, the balance started to shift. The Rookie of the Year race became the first major test. Chet had a strong case because he was helping Oklahoma City win at a high level. He played smart, protected the rim, spaced the floor, and looked like the perfect modern big man for a rising contender. But Wembanyama was different. He was not just producing numbers. He was changing how teams played. Opponents attacked the paint differently when he was nearby. Guards hesitated. Big men rushed shot. Coaches had to build entire game plans around his length, timing, and skill. That is why Wemby winning Rookie of the Year mattered so much. It told the league that even if Chet was already excellent, Wembanyama was operating on a different kind of ceiling. Then came the defensive conversations. Again, Chet was respected. Again, he had the tools. But Wemby's impact was louder, stranger, and harder to ignore. He did not just block shots. He erased options. He made players rethink decisions before they even released the ball. And with every award race Wemby won, the rivalry became more complicated for Chet. Because Chet was not failing. That is the important part. He was becoming one of the best young big men in the NBA. He was helping OKC win. He was proving that the Thunder's belief in him was real. But Wembanyama kept taking the bigger symbolic victories. That is what makes this matchup so tense. Chet is not chasing respect from average players. He already has that. He is chasing separation from the one young big everyone keeps placing above him. And Wemby is defending more than award. He is defending the idea that he is the future of the league. So when they collide in the Western Conference Finals, it is not just about one possession. It is about every comparison since 2021. Every debate, every award, every headline, every fan who said Chet was close, and every fan who said Wemby was already alone at the top. That pressure is why a small bump can feel like a statement. That pressure is why a missed call can feel personal. And that pressure is why this rivalry does not need trash talk to feel real. The line between playoff defense and going too far, by this point in the series, the question was no longer whether Oklahoma City wanted to be physical with Victor Wembanyama. Of course they did. That was the plan from the beginning. Crowd him, bump him, make every catch uncomfortable, force him to feel bodies before he could even turn toward the rim. The Thunder knew they could not let Wemby play freely, because once he gets rhythm, the game starts bending around him. But there is a difference between physical defense and making fans wonder if the line has been crossed. That is where the debate exploded. To OKC supporters, this was simply playoff basketball. Nobody gets an easy path to the finals. Stars get tested, big men get hit. Every possession in the paint becomes a fight for space, balance, and control. From that view, Chet Holmgren and the Thunder were not doing anything wrong. They were just trying to survive against a player with impossible size and skill. But Spurs fans saw something else. They saw Wembanyama getting grabbed, bumped, crowded, and knocked off balance again and again. They saw a young superstar forced to absorb contact that did not always get called, and when the footstep clip went viral, it felt like proof of what they had been saying all series. Wemby was being pushed to the edge. That is why this story became bigger than one replay. It became a question about protection. How much contact should officials allow against a generational player? How much physicality is fair before it becomes dangerous? And if referees do not control the tone early, do players eventually start taking matters into their own hands? That tension is what made every possession feel personal. Every time Chet leaned into Wemby, fans watched closer. Every time Wemby hit the floor, the internet reacted faster. Every missed whistle became part of the larger argument. And every small collision added fuel to a rivalry already burning hot. Still, the truth is not simple. Oklahoma City's defense is one of the reasons they are dangerous. They are young, long, fast, disciplined, and fearless. They do not want opponents to feel comfortable. That is not dirty by itself. That is what elite playoff teams do. But when the opponent is Wembanyama, the margin feels thinner because one awkward landing could change everything. One reckless moment could shift a series, a franchise, even a player's future. That fear is what made fans so emotional. They were not only reacting to contact, they were reacting to what could have happened. And in the modern NBA, sometimes the possibility is enough to start a fire. The series became bigger than the scoreboard. By the time the series reached its most important stretch, the basketball itself was already dramatic enough. San Antonio had punched back. Oklahoma City had answered. The Spurs showed they could win with Wembanyama controlling both ends of the floor, while the Thunder proved they had the depth, speed, and discipline to drag the series back in their direction. But somehow, the scoreboard was no longer the only story. Every game became a battle inside the battle. Wemby against Chet, Spurs frustration against OKC physicality, young talent against young talent, future superstar against future contender, and every time the camera found those two near each other, fans leaned closer. That is what made Game 5 so important. Oklahoma City did not just win. They responded like a team that understood the pressure. After San Antonio had tied the series and made the Thunder look vulnerable, OKC came back with force. Their defense tightened. Their bench gave them energy. Their pace made the Spurs uncomfortable. And suddenly, the Thunder were one win away from the NBA Final. But even after OKC took control of the series, the conversation online kept circling back to Wembanyama and Holmgren. That says everything. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander could score. OKC's role players could swing momentum. The coaching adjustments could decide entire quarters. But the internet still wanted the rivalry. Fans wanted to analyze every bump, every look, every box out, every freeze frame that made the tension feel real. Because this series was not just about who had the better roster. It was about who would own the future first. For Oklahoma City, the message was clear. They are not afraid of Wembanyama. They have bodies to throw at him, a system built on pressure, and a young core that believes it is already ready for the biggest stage. For San Antonio, the message was just as clear. As long as Wemby is on the floor, no series feels finished. He can erase mistakes, create impossible shots, and turn one possession into a moment people remember for years. That is why the viral clips mattered so much. They became symbols. The footstep clip became a symbol of danger. The timeout bump became a symbol of disrespect. Jalen Williams' reaction became a symbol that even OKC knew this rivalry had crossed into something deeper. And now, with the Thunder holding the edge, the pressure sits on both sides. Chet has to prove he can stand in Wemby's shadow and still win the war. Wemby has to prove that individual greatness can overcome a deeper, more complete team. OKC has to finish the job. San Antonio has to survive one more storm. That is playoff basketball at its best. Not clean, not simple, not quiet, just pressure, pride, history, and two young giants fighting for the right to say the future belongs to them first. The rivalry is only beginning. At the end of all this noise, all these clips, all these arguments, and all these slow motion replays, one thing becomes clear. Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren are not just fighting for one series. They are fighting for position in the next era of the NBA. Oklahoma City may have the deeper roster. The Thunder may have the cleaner system, the stronger bench, the home court edge, and a young core that already looks built for years of playoff battles. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander leading the offense, Chet protecting the rim, and enough athletic defenders to make every opponent uncomfortable. But San Antonio has Wembanyama, and that changes every calculation. Because Wemby is not just another superstar. He is the kind of player who forces teams to rethink basketball itself. He stretches defenses, protects the rim, creates mismatches, and turns ordinary possessions into impossible puzzles. Even when the Spurs are behind, even when the Thunder look stronger, there is always a feeling that Wembanyama can bend the game back with one block, one deep three, or one moment that nobody else on the floor could create. That is what Chet is up against. And that is also why Chet matters so much. Holmgren is not some side character in Wemby's story. He is one of the few young big men with the length, skill, timing, and confidence to challenge him over the next decade. He does not need to become Wembanyama. He needs to become the best version of himself inside a Thunder team that already knows how to win. That is the strategic lesson here. San Antonio is building around one impossible force. Oklahoma City is building with balance, depth, pressure, and collective belief. One path is centered on a generational talent. The other is built around a complete machine. And this series is showing us that the future of the NBA may not belong to one style alone. It may belong to whoever learns faster. But there is also a human lesson underneath the rivalry. Competition makes basketball beautiful. Rivalries give the game emotion. Physical defense, pride, and pressure are part of the playoffs. But there is a line that should never be forgotten. Greatness should be challenged, not endangered. Players can battle hard, talk with confidence, and fight for every inch without losing respect for the person standing across from them. That is what makes a rivalry last. Not hatred, not reckless plays, not trying to hurt someone, but the desire to beat another great player at his best. Wembanyama and Holmgren may be linked for years. Every playoff meeting, every award race, every viral clip, and every head-to-head matchup will add another chapter. Some nights Wemby will look unstoppable. Some nights Chet and OKC will have the last laugh. But the real winner is the NBA, because the league has found something it always needs: a rivalry with history, tension, talent, and unfinished business. So now it is your turn. If you believe Victor Wembanyama is going to become the face of the NBA, comment 1. If you believe Chet Holmgren and the Oklahoma City Thunder are the real future of the league, comment 2. Like the video, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe to the channel for more stories from inside the league's biggest rivalries.